Hi, I'm Owen Samuelson. Welcome to the CineFiles, your weekly film fix, aka the show that allows you to eavesdrop on the conversations of fellow film fanatics. All right, well, I want to, before I introduce my co-host here, I want to ask all of you, if you like the show, you like what we're doing, please promote it on your Facebook walls and check out the Facebook group, which is on Facebook. Eric and I and Mike, we're all on Facebook. Talk to us, friend us, and put CineFiles in the subject so we know who you are. Let me introduce everybody anyway. This is, of course, Eric Cohen and Mike Foltz. All right, well, today we got a lot of requests for this. We actually taped an episode about this a while ago, but unfortunately because of, a comedy of errors, the tapes were somehow misplaced, lost, they're in the forbidden zone, who the fuck knows. Today, you requested it, you're gonna get it. Today is the first part of the Stanley Kubrick saga, which is his entire works. We're going to start out with Kubrick.
Wait a second, would the Forbidden Zone, would be that the same place where Susan Tyrrell is still to this day?
Hervé Villechaize.
I think that's Hervé Villechaize.
No, Susan Tyrrell was in it too.
That's right. I haven't seen it for a while.
I know it's
Richard Elfman. I know it's Richard Elfman.
But this is the Kubrick episode.
Yeah, so what is Forbidden?
Not the...
You said it was in the Forbidden Zone, so as a film geek, I just...
Oh, my
I riffed off.
Thank you, God, thank God for Final Cut Pro.
Can we please finally talk about Kubrick? Please. Kubrick.
You should have some of my Cristal.
I'm going to let you take this, Eric. You're the
I'm the preeminent Kubrick fan.
I'm going to give it... I will... Well, yeah, Mike can take it, because... Go ahead, Mike.
Mike, it's yours. Go with it.
Well, Stanley Kubrick, who was actually born in New York City, born in Bronx, right? Yes. He started out as a photographer, and he was so talented that he immediately got work with Look magazine, and then later on that led to Life magazine, and he started kind of toying around with the idea of making films, and of course I'm paying this quite the short shrift. But it's kind of funny when you read about Stanley Kubrick, whether it's from his bio or from what celebrities say in interviews that had worked with him and stuff. Some of the cool things, when you live in New York, you find out that his favorite theater in the whole city was on Staten Island. And he was a big fan. When he moved to England, he was very paranoid about a nuclear war. And he was very paranoid about living in the big city and being trapped there. So when he moved to London, one of his regrets of New York was not being able to visit Katz's Delicatessen. He really loved Katz's a lot.
For our fans out there that aren't from New York, Katz is an institution.
Basically, the best way to describe people, you've seen When Harry Met Sally? That's
the famous organ, but most important, it has the best,
place.
Hands down, the best pastrami sandwich you will ever have anywhere in the United States.
It completely makes sense that he missed this place. But anyway,
there you go.
So he started out with his first film was called Fear and Desire. And one of the actors in there is a director that became famous later, Paul Mazursky. And it's a war film. Right. I believe it takes place during Korean War.
Well, let's just
I've never seen it because it was out of circulation for so long. I think about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they wanted to, the Film Forum, which is a theater here in New York, received a print.
Repertory theater, very respected.
Yeah, they found a print, and they were going to be showing it exclusively. And Stanley Kubrick hated this film so much, thought it was so flawed, that he wrote a personal handwritten letter to the Film Forum begging them not to show it.
Okay. Was that the thing you wanted to tell me, the context?
You're not supposed to talk about that on camera.
No, I'm not. I don't know.
Well, anyway,
you're such an amateur.
I asked, we were talking about this earlier just before we started shooting. I said, I hear film designing really isn't that good anyway.
Well,
he said, well, I got something to say about that. I guess that was
I have something to say
about it. He didn't like it.
Well, I have something to say about it. So, well, since Kubrick has died, the George Eastman House, which is a very respected film place.
Eastman Kodak.
Yeah, Eastman Kodak. They own a lot of prints. They archive them. They show movies up in Rochester. They actually had a print of the movie, and it was sent to Turner Classic Movies, where it was fully restored, and it was just broadcast on HD cable. Hopefully, we'll have a copy of it soon, and we can review it and talk about it. But
wasn't it shot though, like in the wilds of Staten Island?
It was shot all over the place.
Was that supposed to be like Korea?
Probably.
I mean,
Actually, I don't think it was shot in Stanley. I believe it was shot in. I think some of it was shot in California, if I'm not mistaken. I was reading up
really?
on it today. Yeah, I believe that. Believe
so
it or not,
he was in California by the time. I guess it makes sense. Well, Mazursky's originally from New York too.
yeah, they were all from New York, but I believe they shot it in California.
Interesting.
But,
so anyway, so Fear and Desire was technically his first film.
But Kubrick kind of disowns it. He really
It was
doesn't
recently
consider it,
premiered on Turner Classic Movies. I think a lot of people DVR'd it or tried to.
Unfortunately, mine crapped out. Sorry.
But the earliest available film in his canon is Killer's Kiss. And what do we think of Killer's Kiss? I haven't seen Killer's Kiss, to tell you honestly. That's the one Kubrick film I haven't seen.
And it's
Why
on
are we
Netflix.
doing this show?
Yeah, exactly, dude.
Why
I
are we
watched
doing
it.
this
I watched
show?
it today on
You
fucking
punk.
Netflix streaming, you motherfucker. It's 67 minutes you couldn't give us, you fucking dick.
Well, I haven't seen it for a long time, but when I did see
I just saw it a couple hours ago. I can refresh everything.
I think you might enjoy The Killer's Kiss because
I'm sort of lying. I have seen it, but it's been a while. And then when I've tried to revisit it, I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I've never seen it all the way through recently. So I need to see it again.
Why are you turning this program into a house of lies?
It's not lies. It's a house of contradictions.
But
Not the same thing.
I find that it is, even though it's rough, even though the acting isn't the best in the world, I gotta say that it has the feel of a really nice classic noir.
It stinks.
But don't you think a lot of it, the way it was shot, was just really, it gives you that.
It stinks. I'm sorry. I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you what my fear. Okay, it's nicely photographed in parts. The story is cliched. You don't. It just there's
But
nothing
at that
going
time,
for
but
it.
at that time, it's not cliched.
And
I don't think.
And the biggest problem.
Or you can make the argument that at that time he was trying to copy something that was
it's
popular to the point that it had been overdone.
It looks like it's trying to be like a Kiss Me Deadly, but without the style. It's beautifully photographed.
Or entertaining.
Or yeah, exactly. It's beautifully
No,
shot.
I hated Kiss Me Deadly, but go on.
That's a great movie. Anyway, Kiss.
What?
This
Yeah.
one, Killer's
Well,
Kiss.
I know.
Let's get back to this.
I was the one who introduced him to Kiss Me Deadly. He hated it, but I'd be curious to see what he thought if he saw it again.
I've seen it twice.
I have a Criterion Blu-ray. Anyway, let me get to what you're asking me.
awesome
I'm giving you my
Anyway,
thoughts.
so Killer's Kiss.
Killer's Kiss. It's nicely photographed, not unexpectedly, because Kubrick shot it himself, and he was a photographer, as you guys said. He did a really good job of capturing New York City. I think it's brilliantly captures New York City. I mean, you get to see the original Penn Station, which is a beautiful, marvelous architectural landmark, which no longer exists. However, there's a big problem with the movie. When Kubrick was shooting the film, he didn't like the boom mic. He said it was ruining the composition of his shots with the shadows. So they shot it without sound, and then they went back and they dubbed the entire movie.
And that's the thing about the film.
Completely
I recall, I
fucks up
remember
everything.
It seemed like a dub film to me.
And it feels like an Italian movie, like by an Italian director or something, because it has.
It's rough.
And it's 3 minutes. It's very short.
But you watch something like this, and you see kind of what he's going to be getting to later on. That's why I think this film's important. Not that it's a great work of cinema, and it's not. And I agree with you on most of your points.
I think the dubbing completely took me out of the movie. Also, the story is just, it's hard to believe that this man who is so meticulous and with an attention to detail could make something that's so hackeyed. In fact, if you look at, I was watching it today, and I was shocked by all the jump cuts I was seeing. There's tons of jump cuts where scenes, it's not because of print damage, it's because of a bad edit. There's a scene where a woman is walking across the table, all of a sudden she disappears out of the frame, obviously because they didn't have coverage.
Also, I mean, like the context too is that was his second film. None of us have seen Fear and Desire. We don't even know how that film looks. But this was his first real film, and it was his first foray into real.
I won't consider his first real film because the problem is because of the post-dubbing and
no,
link.
Literally, it was one of
Killer's
his first film, and he was probably just learning the technology. I'm not excusing the film.
and
I'm just
Killer's
saying
Kiss
that he was
wasn't-
a photographer that was making a movie.
A Killer's Kiss, though, if I could be wrong, but I don't think it was a studio picture, was it?
No, it wasn't.
No, it
That's,
wasn't.
that's why I don't
Yeah.
consider it a real film. It was
Yeah.
to me, it's like a student film, but it looks.
Yeah.
It's a beautifully shot student film, and that's what I think it
Yeah.
is. It really feels like something that was submitted for a student
I would
thesis.
not disagree with that.
However, I will go on record now. You can see some of Kubrick's talent, like I said, with the lens, and there's some beautiful imagery, but with the storytelling and the writing, it's hard to believe this is the same Kubrick, because the next film is it's one of the biggest leaps in talent I've ever seen, and that is The Killing, which was his first. It's not really. It was some money was given by the studio United Artists
But
to
it
make
was a very low budget
It was a
film.
low budget film. Didn't make any money, and the reason it didn't make any money is it's too artsy. It's too intelligent. It's very well done.
Well, it's not only that The Killing wasn't well received when it first came out. The reason why it's well regarded now, it became a bit of a cult movie, sort of a midnight movie kind of thing, and it's only been in the late '70s that people have been reevaluating, saying that it's one of the great heist movies.
I would
yeah,
agree.
for a long time. A lot of people didn't think it was a good film, which is hard to imagine now when you see it. Cause
Yeah,
it's
but
fantastic.
sometimes people just they don't get it, and
Well, but you had films like Asphalt Jungle, Re-Fi-Fi, which came out just before that. In fact, you could say that The Killing would not have been made if it wasn't for those films. In fact, Asphalt Jungle also stars Sterling Hayden. Those were well-received films.
But The Killing, I think, down the road, is just as influential and revolutionary as the two films that you mentioned with Asphalt Jungle, John Huston.
Oh,
and
I think The
Re-Fi-Fi.
Killing is more influential than those films today, because look at the story structure with the way that the end is told with each
Well,
different
I will
person.
say I liked Asphalt Jungle, John Huston, but I think actually they both had Sterling Hayden in it, right?
Yes, they both had Sterling Hayden. We had this discussion in another episode about, we did a show on caper films. And
Check
we
it out
had
on YouTube.
discussed this. I would say The Killing is influential in certain ways, but if it wasn't for Asphalt Jungle and if it wasn't for Re-Fi-Fi, there would be no Killing.
I can agree.
And The Killing was
Or at least
made,
there would be no money put up
The
by
Killing
United
was
Artists.
made because of the success of these two films. It was based on a novel. What's really interesting, I don't know the name of the novel, but it wasn't called The Killing. The rights to the novel was originally going to be negotiated with Frank Sinatra, and those fell through. So Kubrick's producer jumped on that. And Kubrick co-wrote the screenplay with Jim Thompson, a great noir novelist.
That's a nice little bit of trivia.
And in fact, I love it. This movie has a very unusual credit where it says screenplay by Stanley Kubrick, and then it says dialogue written by
Jim Thompson.
Yeah, which I thought was a very unusual.
But boy, does it have a feel of a Jim Thompson novel. Oh,
Yeah.
it does. And the acting is just out of sight.
It's very good.
Out of sight. Sterling Hayden, one of his best performances I've ever seen, and he's got quite a few under his belt, and this is one of his best. And kind of a cult favorite of mine,
I know who
Timothy Carey.
Tim Carey.
Yeah,
he's
he's
great
great
as
at
the
it.
sniper.
And who else is very good as Elijah Cook in a role that
Elijah
could be
Cook.
very stereotypical, and just cliched, but he plays it very well. I did have a couple little problems here and there with some of the dialogue, the scenes between Elijah Cook and his wife, but overall I still thought the movie was excellent. It didn't detract. I thought it was Kubrick.
It's a
learning
great
history.
noir.
It is
it's
a great noir.
example of noir cinema in the mid to late 50s, and it is. I agree with you. It's Kubrick finally coming into his own as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I felt there was a lot more. He had a lot more confidence in his abilities.
Now it was Kubrick and this same producer that went on to do Paths of Glory together.
Yes.
And I'd love to know the story about how they went on to do that, since The Killing was not successful
That's what's
either
amazing.
financially or critically.
But I have a
And
feeling.
I think it was Kirk Douglas that stepped in.
Kirk Douglas is the one who stepped in
As
from what I
far
understand.
as far as I know, and I read that part of his biography, once The Killing was made, granted it wasn't successful, but it was also one of those films that was a classic stepping stone in the sense that once the studio brass got a hold of The Killing and got to see what kind of talent Kubrick had and how he could put together a story on film.
That's correct.
That's how that led to
I don't
other.
know if so much the
That's
studio brass. My understanding is, didn't Kirk Douglas fight for Kubrick?
No,
Did you know
I
that?
just read it today. Here's what happened. The head of United Artists, the movie didn't do well, loved the movie. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the original movie, they made him, they said after they read the script, they said they liked it, but they said the ending, they wanted to change the ending. So Kubrick pretended to rewrite the ending, even though he didn't, and submitted the same script again. And then they watched the movie and they loved it, and they just said, we're going to keep it even with this bleak ending. And like I said, the head of United Artists liked the film enough to believe in Kubrick to give him another chance. So that's the reason why. And it was well received by Orson Welles. He loved the film quite a bit, and there was a few other people.
And Kirk Douglas saw The Killing, and he liked it and recognized that, and he was looking for somebody to do Paths of Glory, and he thought he'd give this young director a
Actually,
shot.
I believe it was the other way around. I think Kubrick had the script, and they brought it to Douglas, and they wrote it where he liked it, and then his star powers what got the movie made, even though it was a very low budget.
I'm just overwhelmed with trivia.
It was less than $1 million,
Coming at me from
which
both
is
sides.
very impressive when you think about
Well,
the scope of
that was
film.
the time where, that's still the case where a star with, that has bankability at the box office falls in love with the script or falls in love with the director, and they can make anything together. And that was a simple case of what Kirk Douglas did.
I assume that Kirk Douglas also loved the context of the script, because the script is a really well written.
We're talking about Paths of Glory.
Yes, we're going on. Well, actually, The Killing was a great movie. It didn't do well financially, but like I said, Kirk Douglas and Kubrick got together and made Paths of Glory, which was an anti-war film. And in fact, I think it's perhaps the best anti-war film.
If not one of the best anti-war films ever made.
This is the film that when you see Paths of Glory, this is the Stanley Kubrick we will get for the rest of his.
This is his first perfect film. I mean, where everything, I think, is absolutely perfect. Don't get me wrong, Killing was near perfect. There was a little rough edges around it, because, you know, that's to be expected, but it wasn't enough to say it's not a great
And
movie.
how, like with The Killing, I think one of the fun scenes, but it's a flawed scene, is the pro wrestler.
I knew you were going to mention that.
Well, you know what?
But it's fun, but the way they speed it up
Since we're still on the
bit,
topic of The Killing,
Three Stooges.
my thing about The Killing is that what makes it unique out of all of Kubrick's good movies, arguably good movies, is that visually it has more of the verite feel than it does a Stanley Kubrick.
Oh, yes, yes.
And it works as a noir verite type of movie. Paths of Glory is his first, you know, the cold, clinical camera.
The tracking shots.
The tracking shots, you know, that starts with Paths of Glory.
Now we're going to shift to Paths of Glory, but in Paths of Glory, let me tell you something. That tracking shot in the trench at the beginning, that's almost perfect.
Yeah.
It isn't almost. It is perfect.
Yeah, it is perfect.
It's the thing I like about this.
Most film directors these days
I would say it's more perfect than perfect.
Okay,
So
it's flawless. How about that?
It's well, it's hands down. It's one of my favorite Kubrick films. It's probably one of the best war movies ever made.
I think it might be his best shot film. I love the way this film is shot. I love the look of it. It's this beautiful, stark black and white, very, like you said, cold. But somehow it just works so well in the war setting.
And you'd be hard pressed to find not only just a war film, but a film in general that packs emotional wallop after emotional wallop. And he just doesn't give it to you at the end or in the middle. It's just one after the other after the other. There's so many classic scenes that you can pull from this film. Once again, it's got my favorite actor Tim Curry in it, playing one of the prisoners that's going to be sacrificed. I don't want to say execute. I want to say sacrifice, because that's what it is. That's what they are.
It's not an execution. It's a sacrifice.
But when the three of them, the three soldiers,
Ralph
are talking,
Meeker, a.k.a. Mike Hammer from Kiss Me Deadly.
Why do I think Joe Turkel was one of them?
He is. He was.
Okay, Joe Turkel, right.
Turkel.
But when the three guys are talking, there's especially how upset Tim Curry is.
You know, so he was fired in the movie, you know. Did you know that?
No.
He was fired, and they used a double because I believe he was being difficult. I don't know the whole story, but I thought that was very unique, because he's very good in the movie. He plays this very cliche type character, but yet he's able to somehow make it his own, where he's not so annoying. I think he. But he's
also showing how scared he is to die.
Oh,
how upset he is. And you know, you see these war films where all these guys have their chins out and they're very stoic, especially when it comes to facing their own mortality. But this guy is completely unafraid to show you what a coward he is in terms of facing his own death.
What I love about the film, too, is that we're talking about anti-war. What I hate about anti-war films usually is that, I'm anti-war, by the way, just for the record, is that they're too preachy, they're too sanctimonious. This film brilliantly captures the hypocrisy.
Well, do you know why? And that's it in a nutshell. It's not even so much an anti-war film, it's an anti-bureaucracy film, or it's an anti-hierarchy film.
That's exactly why it works.
And they focus on the politics more than they do on the horrors of war, which is what makes it interesting. Because the whole, I mean, for those of you who haven't seen Paths of Glory.
That's a very good point.
For those of you who haven't seen Paths of Glory, it deals with a command that turns out to be a disastrous mistake, and someone needs to be blamed for it. And rather than blame the actual commander, the person that was in charge, who actually made that command, they try to scapegoat. They pick three soldiers that will be executed as sort of scapegoats for what happened, so they could appease the politics of the situation.
That's the one thing that makes you sick about this film, is from the minute you see the movie, you know immediately it's not going to be a pleasant ending. But Kubrick is able to throw in some nice little things in there with the character, you know, the Kirk Douglas and the general, where he's trying to somehow, you think he might have a chance to save these people, but you know immediately it's not going to work. It's like a Salem. It's basically, I would say, the whole trial sequence, which is very big, is a very big part of the movie, is the Salem witch trials.
And you'd never think you would say this about Kubrick, but it's his most humane movie.
Definitely.
It's
I
his
agree with
most
you on that.
emotionally involving film.
Well, Kubrick, one of the strangest bits of trivia I ever read about Kubrick was one of Kubrick's biggest goals or wishes as a filmmaker was he wished that he could make a film that could physically hurt someone. And I always thought that was one of the strangest things I ever heard, that he wishes he could make a film that could physically hurt somebody. And I always wondered what he meant by that, but it's a very interesting quote. But Eric is completely right when it comes to the bureaucracy, the hierarchy, basically the way the generals act as if their men, the soldiers that they command under them, are simply chess pawns. And that's where you have...
And Kubrick being the chess master makes sense.
And then you have, exactly, and you have Kirk Douglas coming in to try and shed some light. He kind of does this thing where he wants to expose these generals, not so much to, well, maybe to the commission that he's trying to report them to and bring them up on charges, but...
He's just trying to defend, I mean, he's their defense attorney, basically.
Right.
And he has to defend them. That's his job. And in doing so, he finds himself butting up against,
the bureaucracy,
where,
yeah, exactly, the ceiling of military command.
And what I like to, I'll give credit, I'm not a very big Kirk Douglas fan. He always shows his ass in movies. This movie, thankfully, he shows his acting chops.
He shows his chest, his big burly chest.
Thankfully not in this one. At least I didn't have to see his
no,
old saggy ass like I saw in all those other movies.
And it's one of Kirk Douglas's best performances. Kirk Douglas could be really, really good, and he could be really, really hammy.
Let me tell you something. That speech at the end is gangbusters. It is brilliant, and I think it's actually the second most powerful scene in the film, because I think the first most powerful is the very end with the song.
Yeah.
You know what? What really worked for this made me make this. Sorry, let me say it again. Do you know what makes this film work for me so much? Is that you really feel the fear of death in this movie. When those soldiers are there crying and upset, you really understand why they're so upset, and you really feel like you're about to get killed yourself. I don't know how he's able to do that, but you really feel you're in there with these guys.
This is it covers the Franco-Prussian War, right? It was France versus Germany.
It was World War I.
Yeah, and it was covering the siege of the anthill.
Yes, and I'll give another credit too. This one was shot for less than $1 million, but the battle scenes in here are phenomenal. There's some wonderful scene of them going out of the trenches and into with the explosions. I was like, how the hell could he pull this off? And I want to also mention, too, the wonderful performance of Joe Turkel, who would later appear in a few other Kubrick films, most notably in The Shining as Grady, the caretaker.
No, as the bartender.
He's the bartender.
Sorry, excuse me. Yes, that's right.
He was the bartender. He's also in Blade Runner.
Excuse
he
me.
was Tyrell.
Sorry, I'll do it again. It's by Joe Turkel, who was best known for the bartender.
Joe Turkel, who plays Tyrell.
Yeah, Joe Turkel, who I've actually run into a few times. He lives over on the Upper East Side.
Oh, he's still alive?
Yeah, he's still alive.
Wow.
But anyway, what's so funny is let's get into the next one. But it's so funny is that Kirk Douglas, who really respected Kubrick's
he was so impressed with him.
He was so impressed with him that they were having problems with this other film called Spartacus, and they decided, hey, let's bring in this guy Kubrick and have him finish it. Unfortunately, this film changed Kubrick's career forever, and not in a positive way, in his opinion. This film is the reason that he decided never to lose control of a film again, and one reason I think that he eventually moved to England. This film, Spartacus, I don't even think Kubrick really likes it too much. In fact, he doesn't even consider it his film.
No, he doesn't. Well, not like he's willing to talk to us about it.
There's another film. There is another film too.
He had control wrested from him pretty early on by Kirk Douglas, who not only had final cut, but he kind of went in and didn't like a lot of the shots that were going on. So Kubrick, I think, shortly after primary photography left.
The reason I don't even want to really get into this.
There's only one real Kubrick shot in there. To me, is the double-decker gladiator training.
It's hard from being like a Kubrick fan and knowing the history behind this film. It's hard to be objective about it. And I mean, like the trend tends to be like on film purists, oh, we're supposed to hate Spartacus because of what happened there. But if you objectively look at it and compare it to other sword and sandal movies of the day, it's not actually a bad film. It's a pretty good Roman epic.
Let's just say this. Don't look at it as a good Kubrick film. It's not a Kubrick film. Look at it as a film not directed by Kubrick, because he didn't really direct the film. This is a film Kirk Douglas really made.
You only recognize one shot in the whole film, and that's the two-tiered gladiator training sequence.
Right.
That's the only thing, because you got the slow camera dipping down. And that's the only shot you're going to recognize in the whole film.
But it does feel like, you know, we talk about like promising directors these days selling out to Hollywood and doing a big budget film where you don't recognize any of that director in that big budget film. Well, that's Spartacus. You won't recognize anything that's Stanley Kubrick in this film.
Well, like I said, this film, and there was another film that he also directed, a few days on it or a few weeks on it before he was fired by the Star, and the Star took over, and that film was One-Eyed Jack.
One-Eyed Jack with Marlon Brando.
Which is a whole other I would have loved to see what would have happened if he actually made that, because the movie on its own is pretty bizarre. I mean, Brando wound up directing that film, and it's a bizarre, like Brando's playing Jesse James, basically.
I would love to know how much Kubrick
he's playing
really
Billy the
directed.
Kid. I'm sorry,
I'd love to know how much Kubrick actually directed before he got fired, because again, it doesn't even feel like a Kubrick
Brando
film.
fell in love with Kubrick. Matter of fact, he had Kubrick live in his house for a long time writing the script. And a lot of times Brando would walk around in a kimono and bang a giant gong for reasons unknown. And Kubrick would be there in like the main room writing the script
Brando.
of One-Eyed Jacks, not wearing pants.
Oh,
Very, very bizarre. But see, one of their big fights was Carl Malden. Because Carl Malden was going to be I think...
Pat Garrett character.
Yeah. And Kubrick kept yelling, because Brando and Carl Malden were both like almost best friends.
Don't forget Streetcar Named Desire.
Yeah, and on the waterfront. But Kubrick said to Brando, there is no way in hell that Carl Malden's going to be... He doesn't have the face to... People are not going to be convinced at all because you got Carl Malden's face here. You're not going to be able to convince anybody of this, and Brando wouldn't listen to him, and that was the real bone of contention. And then that made all the other little difficulties after that pretty much unbearable, and that's why Kubrick left.
Well, he left, but also, I mean, it was a trouble. I mean, Kubrick's only like maybe a quarter of that story. I mean, there's like he went through all these other people, and there's like, and then the script went through. It was supposed to be a story about Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett, and then that totally changed. You just had the only thing that was saved was the actual dynamic between the two characters are kind of similar to Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, but that's about it. But anyways,
yeah, he kept saying that Carl Malden wasn't sympathetic. I think that's what he was trying to say.
Well, this film anyway, that film and Spartacus are the reason that Kubrick went to England to get away from Hollywood brass.
I'm just curious, why did you like Spartacus? Because my problem was I made the mistake. I went in thinking it was a Kubrick film, but distancing myself from that, I still found it very boring, very uninteresting, and I found it had one good performance, and that was Charles
Lawton.
Charles Lawton.
I think it's
always good.
I think it's one of the better sword
No,
and
I'm
sandal
sorry.
type.
I'm sorry, not Charles Lawton.
Peter Ustinov?
Peter Ustinov.
Because Charles Lawton's in it too.
Yeah, I got it mixed up.
I think it's one of the better, more sensible, because a lot of the, like, I'm not like a fan of like the 1960s, 1950s Roman sandal epic type films. But
I thought Ben-Hur was better.
But most of them are pretty melodramatic and overwrought, and I like Spartacus because it's more down to earth. You know, there's more of a I don't want to say realistic, but the whole politics and the way that the performances are portrayed. The only problem I have with the film is Tony Curtis.
I was just going to say, he's the worst part of the film.
He's the worst. I know that there's like, you know, they like to team up Tony Curtis with Kirk Douglas every now and then in films, but...
I'm sorry, he stinks.
At this point of Tony Curtis's career, he's not believably young enough to play that character.
He's as wooden can be in that.
I don't believe Bernie Schwartz from the Bronx is a Roman gladiator, you know, whatever.
Yeah, that's the biggest flaw for me with the movie.
He's too contemporary. The film, the reason I don't like it, you said exactly why I don't like it. Back in the 50s and 60s, they made a ton of these sandal movies, you know, whatever you want to call them. And Ben-Hur, you know, you had this, but then you keep making them and just they're out of gas. They're all polished and there's no context, and that's why I don't like the film. But anyway, let's say we said this. Anyway, Spartacus and One-Eyed Jacks were the reasons that Kubrick went to England to get away from Hollywood brass so he'd have more control. He said he would never work with a star or anybody that he couldn't control. He wanted to be in control of every aspect of his production. And surprisingly, he got it, and he was able to make it.
And it's really interesting that he went from doing these potentially commercial projects to deciding to do something that could be the least commercial concept, the adaptation of Nabokov's Lolita.
I like you too, Dimitri.
Dimitri.
That is my favorite
Mein
line.
Führer, I can walk.